to rise and resist Zionist violence. Across the ocean, the Colombian people have been on national strike for 46 days, even though, as Mama Cristina very wisely told us, this has been a struggle that has been going on for centuries. The uprisings of this year began on April 28th in response to a proposed tax reform by President Iván Duque, which would have affected poor and middle-income families at a time when more than 42% of Colombia's population is living below the poverty line. The government was forced to withdraw this tax reform by the fourth day of protests. But the protests didn't stop because, in fact, they have grown into a movement of historic proportions. And this is because Colombian people have had enough. Workers, peasants, Black and Indigenous people, students, youth, and all oppressed people are rising up against a government that has grossly mishandled the pandemic. It has imposed a brutal neoliberal agenda of austerity that has worsened economic conditions for working and middle classes, and has responded to protests with unprecedented levels of violence and police terror, and it continues to sanction the killings of Black and Indigenous social leaders, union members, and land defenders. Can I hear a boo? I want to remind us that the Colombian state and the guerrilla group FARC signed a historic peace accord in 2016, but the Duque administration has refused to honor it. Before the peace accord, the state had its scapegoat in the FARC, but it can no longer justify the relentless violence that we have seen since 2017. And after 5 years of bloody massacres, the continued displacement of Indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities from their ancestral lands, and the systematic extermination of social leaders and ex-combatants, it's very clear that the call is coming from inside the house. In these 46 days of massive protests, more than 68 people have died at the hands of police. 358 people are still missing, while multiple dead bodies were washing up in the Cauca River in the last few weeks. There are also 47 people with eye injuries and 24 victims of sexual assault. This is how the Colombian state retaliates when people rise up to defend life.
So as y'all just heard, the details of our current realities might look different, but it also resonates with, hearing this resonates with me, right? So even though we might come from different lands separated by oceans, we know that this violence that is waged against our people is the same violence. To give y'all a little bit of context as to how these violences actually stem from the same place, right? Both Colombia and Israel are considered some of the US's strongest allies in Latino America and the Middle East respectively. Both countries have become testing grounds for military weapons and strategies, and these strategies have long been exported across the world.
The US gives $3.8 billion a year to Israel, and it has sent over $10 billion to Colombia in military aid through Plan Colombia, a US foreign aid initiative that imposed hyper-militarizing policing methods with the excuse of combating left-wing insurgent groups and drug cartels in Colombia. And Joe Biden was its chief architect, by the way. And he brags about it. Like, that's a good thing. These aid packages have been sold as promoting peace and security, defense, and even human rights, but we know what they are actually fueling: ethnic cleansing, land theft, blood-curdling violence, all to protect the interests of the US and multinational corporations.
Go.
And our current tragedies are not just linked by US military aid. Israel and Colombia have a long history of collaboration. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, let me tell you about that real quick. Since the late 1980s, Israeli mercenaries and military officials have been heavily involved in advising the Colombian government on matters of defense and counterinsurgency efforts. We know what that means, right? It means the murder of a lot of our people. They have brokered arms deals between Israel and Colombia and have trained both the Colombian military and paramilitary death squads. Israel's tried and tested on Palestinians tactics, right, against the Palestinians have become the basis of the Colombian paramilitary's war against peasants and Black and indigenous communities.